A story told from the cold shores of the north. In a small village nestled between the icy fjords and shadowed pine forests of ancient Norway, the cries of gulls echoed overhead and smoke from peat fires curled lazily into the gray morning sky. The year was 843, and in a cramped sod-roofed hut, a boy named Eirik rubbed the sleep from his eyes. He was only 8 winters old, but already his hands were calloused from chores, and his back ached from carrying water buckets down the rocky path. There were no toys, no schoolhouses, no carefree days. For Viking children like Eirik, life was duty and survival. The harsh cold and the harsher work. Eirik pulled on a tunic that was rough and itchy, spun from all his mother had woven during the long nights. The hut was cold, colder than death, and frost rimmed the inside of the windows. There was no firewood left. His father had taken the last of it to the longhouse the night before. His younger sister, Freya, no older than 5, coughed beside the hearth. Their mother wrapped her in furs, whispering a prayer to the old gods. Freya had a fever again, and they had no healer. Outside, Eirik began the day's work. He fetched icy water from the stream, chopped brittle branches for kindling, and fed the goats. If he slacked, his uncle Rurik, a battle-scarred warrior with a quick temper, would lash him with a willow rod. Strong hands make strong men, Rurik would bark, and weak boys feed the crows. The fear of raids and spirits. At night, the children huddled close to their mother as the elders spoke of raids, other Viking bands that might attack for livestock or revenge. No one was truly safe. Even kin could turn foe. The woods whispered with tales of trolls and draugr, the restless dead who walked at night. Children were told to never stray past the river at dusk. Eirik had once seen a girl vanish into the trees. Only her bloody doll was found days later. There were no guards, just gods and hope. No school, only survival. There were no books, no writing. Boys were taught to fight by watching their fathers. Girls were taught to cook, sew, and prepare for marriage as soon as they bled. Childhood was brief, a fragile window between birth and burial. Eirik's older brother, Leif, had died the previous winter, bitten by frost after getting lost in a storm. His body was found beneath the snow, fingers blue and stiff, eyes wide with fear. He was 12. They buried him under a cairn with a small wooden carving of Thor's hammer to guard his soul. Hunger, disease, and silence. Food was always scarce in the village. In summer, they ate fish and wild berries. In winter, it was dried meat, if any was left. Children were the last to eat, after the warriors, elders, and fathers. Sickness came without warning and stayed without mercy. Boils, fevers, rot. Sometimes, an entire hut would go silent, its door barred with bone and rope. There were no healers, only herbs and chants. But still, they laughed. And yet, even in this grim world, Viking children like Eirik found moments of joy. In spring, they ran barefoot through the moss, chasing hares and carving little boats from driftwood. They sang songs of Odin and Thor, dreaming of battles and greatness. They knew nothing else. This was life. And life, though cruel, was theirs to fight for. Part 2. The Price of Becoming a Man. The spring thaw came late that year. The snows receded slowly from the rocky fields, leaving behind muddy paths and the stench of rot. Dead things came to light, rabbits, birds, even a half-frozen wolf pup with its ribcage split open by hunger. Eirik stared at it in silence. He didn't flinch. He only counted its teeth, wondering what strength it had once held. He was nearing his 9th winter, and the men no longer treated him as a child. "You'll be blooded this year," Uncle Rurik said one morning, tossing him a short blade with a rusted hilt. "No more crying. No more hiding behind your mother's skirts." Eirik gripped the blade. It felt heavy, awkward, but he did not let it fall. The first kill. It was summer when they brought the goat to the center of the village. Rurik handed Eirik a knife carved from whalebone. The animal bleated softly, eyes wide, hooves bound. The elders stood in a circle, watching. His mother stood in the background, clutching Freya, who buried her face in her mother's tunic. "This is your first blood," Rurik said, his voice sharp as flint. "A man must know how to end life, so he may protect it." Eirik's hands trembled. He looked at the goat, then at the faces around him. No softness, no pity, only the unspoken law of the North. Kill or be nothing. He knelt and did as he was told. The blood stained his tunic. It splattered his boots. He did not cry, but that night his hands would not stop shaking. The winter of hunger. That autumn, the crops failed. Too much rain. Not enough sun. The ground had rotted beneath the barley and cabbage. The smokehouse was half empty, and the goats grew thin. The fish swam deeper into the sea, beyond the reach of the village's boats, which had not been repaired since the last storm shattered their hulls. The village changed. The old went first. They simply stopped eating, gave their portions to the young, and waited by the fire to fade. Then came the weak, the lame boy whose legs never worked right, the woman with the broken spine, a mother who lost her child and no longer had the will to live. Eirik saw it all. He shared half his broth with Freya each night, pretending he was full. He told her stories about gods with golden hair and wolves made of flame. He carved her little wooden dolls, though his fingers bled from the cold. "Will we die?" she asked him once, as snow drifted in through the cracks in the roof. "No," he said, "not yet." The raiders return. One gray morning, horns blew from the sea cliffs. Longboats. But they did not bring trade. They brought raiders, other Northmen from across the fjords, hardened by the same hunger and desperation. Shields gleamed in the morning frost. Axes rose like the teeth of some ancient beast. The village scrambled. The warriors, few and underfed, grabbed what weapons they had. Rurik, wild-eyed and hungry for blood, handed Eirik a spear. "Stay behind me. If I fall, run. If your mother dies, protect the girl. That's your oath." Eirik nodded, swallowing the fear that clung to his throat like smoke. The raiders came with fire and fury. Huts burned. Screams filled the air. Blood soaked the snow, turning it black. Eirik saw men he had known his whole life fall, cut down like stalks of grain. He saw a woman dragged from her home and beaten. He saw a boy no older than him try to flee, only to be struck down by a thrown axe. He stayed behind Rurik, who fought like a demon. But even demons bleed. A spear caught Rurik in the side. He staggered, eyes wide, blood pouring from his mouth. Eirik screamed, but he did not run. He picked up the blade Rurik dropped and stood his ground. He stabbed once, twice, then again, until the raider in front of him stopped moving. It was the first man he killed. Not a goat, not a chicken, a man. Aftermath. When the smoke cleared, only half the village still stood. The raiders took what they wanted: food, tools, even captives. But Eirik's family survived. His mother was wounded, but alive. Freya, shaken, but unharmed. That night, they buried the dead beneath piles of stones. Rurik's body was burned on a pyre, as was his wish. Eirik lit the flames himself. "You are cruel," he whispered into the fire, "but you made me strong." A boy no longer. By the time Eirik reached his 12th winter, he was no longer a boy. His arms were strong from labor. His eyes had seen more than most men twice his age. He could hunt, fight, build, and skin. He could carry Freya through snowdrifts that reached his chest. He could lead when others despaired. But he did not smile much anymore. He had learned what it meant to survive, to sacrifice, to hurt, to lose. And in the North, that was what childhood truly meant. Part 3. Ashes of Childhood, Fire of Fate. The Girl Who Watched the Flames. Freya was 7 the day her uncle Rurik died, and though she had not liked him, she cried quietly when the flames consumed his body. Not for him, but for what he took with him. He had been the last strong arm in their household, the only man to stand between her and the world's teeth. Her brother Eirik, still a boy in the eyes of the elders, had blood on his hands now. And that changed him. He no longer told stories by the fire. He no longer carved dolls or laughed at the funny way the goat sneezed. He was sharpening blades now. He walked with shoulders like iron and eyes like flint. A girl's burden. For Freya, childhood was no softer than her brother's, only different in its cruelty. There was no talk of swords for her, no glory in raids. Girls were to learn the loom, the pot, the cradle. She was taught to knead dough even when there was no flour, to skin rabbits when her fingers bled, to heat stones for water and boil herbs for fevers, even when they did nothing. Her mother was proud but tired. Too many nights with no sleep. Too many winters with too little warmth. When Freya slipped up, burned the stew, or dropped a spindle, her mother's hand came swift. Not from hatred, but from desperation. "Girls must be perfect," she would hiss through gritted teeth, "or they die." Eirik's first voyage. When Eirik turned 15, he left. The chieftain had gathered young men to crew a new longship headed west, toward the kingdoms of the Angles and the Saxons. There was promise of loot, gold, and cattle, maybe even wives. Their mother begged him not to go. Freya said nothing, but when no one looked, she slipped a tiny carved pendant into his satchel, a fox, the symbol of their old clan. For cleverness, for watching in silence. "Come back with your hands full," she whispered at the docks, "or don't come back at all." Eirik gave her a hard smile. "I'll come back with blood under my nails and silver in my mouth." Then he was gone. Alone with the cold. With Eirik away, the village turned colder still. The nights stretched longer. The wolves howled louder. Freya worked twice as hard. She hauled water, chopped wood, and helped deliver a neighbor's child when the midwife drank herself into a stupor. She stitched wounds when the healer was too old to see straight. She chased away ravens from the graves of the dead. At 10 winters old, she was already being looked at, not as a child, but as a woman. The baker's son offered her rabbit meat once, smiling like he was doing her a favor. She thanked him politely. That night, she found the meat was rotten, so she fed it to his dog. It died 3 days later, and the boy never looked her way again. Whispers of the old ways. One night, Freya awoke to find an old crone at the edge of the village, a seeress with long white hair, braided bones in her belt, and eyes like cloudy moonlight. She spoke in riddles. "You are not your mother's daughter, nor your brother's shadow," the woman rasped. The gods spin thread through your fingers, girl. You will not die in fire or childbed. You are meant to see." Freya said nothing. She only watched the way the firelight danced on the woman's skin, like it feared her. When she woke the next morning, the crone was gone, but on the doorstep lay a pouch of herbs wrapped in sealskin and a bone needle carved with runes. That day, Freya began learning the secret ways. In silence. In shadows. Eirik's return, with blood and silence. 2 years passed. Then, one spring morning, Freya saw sails on the horizon. She dropped her water pail and ran to the cliffs. The longship was smaller than it had left. Fewer shields. Fewer voices. But Eirik stood at the prow, a hardened man now, taller, broader, bearing a deep scar across his jaw and a haunted look in his eyes. He carried silver, but no laughter. He had killed men. Many. He had seen cities burn. He had watched friends scream as they bled into foreign dirt. He had taken slaves and seen children orphaned by his axe. And now, all he wanted was peace. But peace was not for Vikings. The gathering storm. That year, a new chieftain rose, harsh and ambitious. He demanded more raids, more blood. Boys barely 12 were conscripted. Girls were bartered like cattle for alliances. The village cracked under the weight of greed and cold. Eirik refused to join the next raid. "I've served. I've bled," he said. "Let me rest." The chieftain laughed. "Then feed the dogs and dig the graves." Freya watched her brother's fists clench. Fire beneath the ice. Whispers spread. Rebellion stirred in low voices and clenched jaws. And at the heart of it stood 2 siblings. Eirik, the scarred warrior with no lord. Freya, the girl who walked with herbs and secrets, who whispered to the wind and listened when no one else could. Together, they would shape something new. Not for glory, not for gold, but for survival. Part 4. The Bone Needle and the Broken Oath. The snow came early that year. By the end of the harvest moon, it clung to the branches like ash after a fire, and the fields cracked beneath the weight of frost. The village braced for another brutal winter. But this year, something had changed. There were whispers in the longhouse. Fires burned low, and words were spoken softly behind hands. The chieftain, Hrold the Cruel, had grown more tyrannical with each passing moon. After returning from a failed raid, he had turned on his own people. Accusations of theft, of cowardice, of disloyalty. He punished entire families. 3 men were hanged. One boy, just 13, had his fingers broken for speaking during a gathering. And in the quiet corners of the village, an ember of resistance was stirring. The warrior who would not kneel. Eirik had kept to himself since his return. He lived in the same sod-roofed hut with his mother and Freya, but he was not the same brother she had once known. He no longer laughed or carved runes for luck. He cleaned his weapons every morning in silence, then walked the cliff paths like a ghost. He refused to bow to Hrold. He refused to take orders. That made him a threat. 2 of the chieftain's guards came to invite him to a feast. He returned home that night with blood on his knuckles and a split lip. Next time, he told Freya, they'll bring 10. Freya and the Bone Needle. While Eirik hardened in steel and blood, Freya grew sharp in different ways. The old seeress had not returned, but the Bone Needle had remained. Freya had begun to see things when she touched it. Flickers of memory, not her own. Visions. A hawk's cry turning to a woman's scream. A wave rolling over a burning ship. A face in the fire. Iris, with blood pouring from both eyes. She studied the herbs now with care. Mugwort for visions. Yarrow for the wounded. Henbane for pain or poison. She learned to watch people closely. The way they blinked when lying, the twitch in their fingers when hiding fear. She listened in the shadows of the smokehouse and the corners of the hearth hall. And she began to gather those who remembered the old ways. Wives who still whispered to Freya. Widows who left offerings for Hel. Even a half-mad hunter who swore he'd seen Odin himself walking in the woods during a storm. Together, they became something more than just women and broken men. They became a spark. The first fire. The rebellion began not with a sword, but with fire. One night, the storehouse burned.
It was swift, clean.
The meat smoked and cracked, but no one died. It was a message, not a massacre. Hrolld flew into a rage. He beat one of his own captains in the middle of the village square. He accused 4 families of sabotage. One man was tied to a post and left in the snow to freeze. But that same night, someone slipped him a blade, and he vanished into the woods. No one saw who had done it. Freya did. She had tied the blade beneath the post with twine soaked in wolfsbane. A deadly warning. Eirik's choice. Eirik knew war was coming. You can still leave, Freya told him one night as they sat by the hearth. Take a ship. Go south. You've earned your escape. But he shook his head. No, I won't leave you. Or this place. She looked at him carefully. You're not the same boy who left with dreams of gold. No, he said. Now I dream of burning it all down. The oath under the tree. It was during the wolf moon, beneath the dead oak where the ancestors were said to whisper, that they gathered. 30 souls in silence. Farmers, old warriors, 3 shield maidens, and even 2 of Hrolld's own guards who had grown weary of his madness. Freya stood in their midst, wrapped in furs, the bone needle tied into her braid. She carried a bowl of blood mixed with snow and ash. One by one, they dipped their fingers into the bowl and touched the bark of the tree. We swear no fealty but to kin. Eirik spoke. No law but the law of survival, Freya said next. No mercy for tyrants, the others whispered. The blood froze on the bark. The oath was sealed, and war, slow and quiet, began to stir beneath the snow. The girl and the ghosts. That night, Freya dreamed of the crone again. You've begun it, the old woman said, sitting in a hall made of smoke and ash. The tree bleeds, the wolf stirs. But your brother, his fire burns too hot. He will break before the end, unless you bind him.
How?
Freya asked. The woman leaned close. Not with words, with pain. Then she vanished into the snowstorm. Freya woke with blood in her mouth and the taste of iron on her tongue. A village on the brink. Hrolld had noticed the change. People no longer looked afraid. Guards found bones outside their huts, carved with runes of death. Meat spoiled in their storage without cause. Tracks vanished in the snow or circled back to the feet of the guards themselves. The chieftain ordered nightly patrols. He beat 3 boys to make an example. But each act of violence only bred more silence. No one laughed at his jokes anymore. Even his warriors slept with knives beneath their beds. He could feel it. Something was coming. He just didn't know when. Part 5. When Wolves Howl. Blood beneath the snow. The moon hung fat and full over the village, casting pale light across the frozen roofs. Wind howled between the huts like a beast searching for its prey. In the longhouse, the fire had died down to coals. Only Hrold's voice echoed, shouting at his warriors, cursing the growing rebellion. He knew something was wrong. The fear he had built his rule upon, it was slipping, like ice cracking underfoot. He could see it in the eyes of the villagers. They didn't flinch anymore. They didn't bow as quickly. Some wouldn't even look at him. And worst of all, there were no names, no suspects, no informants, just silence. The first strike. The rebellion did not come in waves. It came like frostbite. First, one of Hrold's shield-bearers vanished during a snowstorm. Days later, his corpse was found tied to a tree, frozen solid, his sword still in its sheath. A raven had picked out his eyes. Next, 2 of the chieftain's tax collectors were ambushed on the Western Trail. Their sled of collected grain was found overturned, the men slain with arrows carved from pine, a hunter's tool, not a warrior's. Eirik was behind both attacks, but it was Freya who had picked the targets, studied their routines, and chosen the times. She was quiet, precise, calculating. She sees what others miss, one of the rebels whispered. She's touched by the gods. Or cursed, some muttered. No girl should know that much of death. Seer, the forbidden path. In the hollowed-out ruins of an old longhouse, long abandoned after fire and rot, Freya practiced the old rites. She wore a cloak of crow feathers and bone. Around her, herbs burned in bowls, mugwort, juniper, and black pine. Runes carved into stone circles lit with firelight as she whispered the chants passed to her by the crone. She had begun to feel things. The pull of a person's thoughts by just touching their cloak. The sickness in a man's gut before he knew it was there. The dreams of warriors before they slept. She had crossed a line. Seer was outlawed among many clans. Magic was for the mad, the wicked, or the doomed. But she no longer cared. She was not the girl who once clutched a wooden doll beside the hearth. She was Freya of the Fox Mark, with the needle of bone and a head full of forgotten chants. And she saw a storm coming. The masked gathering. The rebels met again, this time masked in animal skins. Wolves, ravens, stags, bears. No names. No faces. Only oaths. Freya led the circle this time. Eirik stood beside her, axe in hand, no longer hiding in the shadows. There will be no more whispers, she said. No more hints and warnings. The time for silence is done. Her voice cut through the cold like steel. Hrold must fall. Not in the woods. Not on the road. But in the square. In front of all. Let the snow drink his blood. There were murmurs, then roars of approval. The fox had spoken. The war would be open. Hrold prepares the trap. But Hrold was not a fool. He had ruled by blood for years. He knew how rebellion stirred, and he knew how to crush it. So he set a trap. He feigned weakness, sending out his men in smaller groups, allowing some to disappear. He let his punishments ease. He even offered gifts at the next gathering, claiming he wanted peace. And then he struck. One night, his loyal guards seized 3 families suspected of rebellion. They dragged them into the square, including children. Without trial, without reason, he ordered them executed. An old man, a mother, 2 boys, 1 girl. When the snow turned red that night, the village knew there could be no turning back. The spark and the blaze. Eirik did not wait for sunrise. That night, he stormed the garrison hut with 5 warriors, blades drawn, killing 3 guards before they even lifted their shields. Freya scattered burning herbs into the wind, calling forth confusion and fear. Dogs turned on their masters. Horses broke free and fled into the woods. A horn sounded once, then was silenced. By dawn, 6 huts burned, and the village was at war. The battle for the square. It began with axes and screams. Hrold's warriors met the rebels near the well. Blades rang. Arrows flew. The snow churned beneath boots and blood. Eirik fought like a wolf, his axe flashing red and silver. He met Hrold himself at the center, old wounds and new rage clashing beneath the icy sky. Hrold was older, heavier, but savage. Their duel lasted long. Long enough for the others to stop and watch. Long enough for Freya to step forward, bones in her hand, runes on her tongue. And just when Hrold raised his axe to deliver the killing blow, he hesitated. He looked up, confused, eyes wide. Freya's whisper slipped into the wind like smoke. "Your blood is not your own anymore, Hrold." And then Eirik's axe found the chieftain's throat. After the silence, when the body hit the ground, the village did not cheer. They only stood, stunned, watching steam rise from the wound in the snow. The tyrant was dead, but the winter was not over. The hunger was still there. The cold still bit. And enemies from other fjords would come. Yet something had changed. The children watched from the huts, boys and girls with soot on their cheeks and knives in their hands. They saw the man who had broken their father's fall. They saw a girl, their age, walk forward with bones and feathers and fire in her voice. And they knew the old world had cracked open. Part 6. The Weight of Crowns. The morning after war. The sun rose blood-red over the village. Smoke still drifted from the smoldering remains of the garrison. Broken shields lay scattered in the square, and the well overflowed with melted snow, darkened by spilled blood. Crows perched on the rooftops, watching in silence, as if they had been waiting for this day. Hrold's body was gone, burned in the night. Freya insisted on it. No cairn, no barrow, no name in stone, she said. Let the wind forget him. Some protested, not because they mourned the tyrant, but because they feared what might come. Hrold had ruled with iron. His violence had kept other warbands at bay. He had been cruel, but he had been strong. Now there was only uncertainty. A village without a leader. For the first time in a generation, the village had no chieftain. The elders, what few were left, argued beneath the oak tree. Names were thrown about. Warriors puffed up their chests. Threats were made. Eirik said nothing. He stood outside his hut sharpening his blade. Quiet, watchful. Freya moved among the people. Not like a queen, not like a witch, but like someone who saw them. She bandaged wounds. She whispered prayers over the dead. She gave children food from her own stores. By evening, the villagers were no longer listening to the elders. They were listening to her. The wolf's mantle. 3 nights later, the decision was made. They gathered in the longhouse, every soul, from the youngest orphan to the oldest widow. A great fire blazed in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the carved beams above. Eirik stood before them, a heavy wolf pelt cloak draped over his shoulders. Rurik's old cloak, worn in the days when he had been feared across 5 fjords. He did not smile. He did not boast. He spoke like stone. "I do not want to rule," he said, "but I will not see this place fall again. I will fight for it. I will bleed for it. I will keep its walls strong." A murmur passed through the crowd, and then Freya stepped beside him. "And I will see what lies beyond those walls," she said. "What threatens us? What comes in dreams and storm clouds? I will speak to the wind and listen to the dead. I will see the danger before it reaches our door." Silence. And then an old woman, toothless and blind, rose from the shadows. "I name them Wolf and Fox," she said, "and I will follow them." The others bowed. The siblings had become more than survivors. They had become leaders. The winter of smoke and teeth. The weeks that followed were brutal. The snow deepened. Wolves came down from the hills, lean with hunger. The food stores dwindled, and every mouthful was rationed. But unlike years past, no child starved. No old man was cast out to freeze. Eirik organized hunts, small, quiet, coordinated. Freya identified which herbs could preserve meat longer. She traded with spirits, some said, though none dared question her openly now. She walked at night through the snow barefoot, muttering to the air, and when she returned, it was always with answers. The message from the fjord. It came on a fog-heavy morning. A raven with red paint on its wings. It landed on the roof of the longhouse and let out 3 screeches before dropping a carved bone rune from its claws. Fehu, the rune of wealth, war, and cattle. Freya picked it up. Her face turned pale. "It's a summons," she said, "from King Jorund of the Fjordlands. Word of Hrold's death has spread." Eirik's jaw clenched. He'll want tribute, or revenge, or both. The road ahead. The next night, Freya sat alone in the snow, the bone needle in her hand, runes carved before her. She burned crow feathers and ashwood and whispered into the wind. A vision came. She saw fire on the sea, ships black as night, a boy with no face, crowned in bones, a mountain cracking open, a wolf with iris eyes, wounded and chained, a girl with her own face, floating above a battlefield, blood dripping from her fingers. She woke gasping. The war was not over. It had just begun. Part 7. Raven ships on the horizon. The silence before the storm. Winter was beginning to break, but the village still sat under gray skies. Snow still crept along the ground like a dying beast, and the wind carried the scent of rot from the forests, as if the earth itself had bled and hadn't healed. Freya stood at the cliff's edge, the red rune of Fehu turning in her fingers. Beneath her, the sea groaned.
Distant. Heavy.
Unnatural. Behind her, the village stirred uneasily. Eirik had doubled the watches.
Spears were sharpened.
Arrows bound. The old, who had once waited for death in silence, now sharpened knives and whispered prayers to Odin. The Raven King was coming. Jorn the Cold-Eyed. King Jorn ruled the fjords to the north. His name was carved into the bones of slaves, painted in blood on the prows of warships. It was said he had never lost a raid, not because he was clever, but because he was merciless. He demanded tribute from all coastal clans, silver, warriors, daughters. Those who refused saw their villages burned, their names forgotten. And now, news had reached him. The village of Skarnhold had risen in rebellion, had slain its own chieftain, and had not sent its winter tithe. He would come, not for silver, but for fear. A council in the Longhouse. The Longhouse was packed with every soul who could walk. Freya stood beside Eirik at the high end of the fire pit, where Hrold had once shouted his commands. Now, Eirik's voice was low but steady. "We have 2 moons," he said. "Maybe less. Jorund has ships, men, and beasts we've never seen. If we stand alone, we fall. And if we submit," asked an old warrior, one-eyed and bitter, "give him your sword and your sister, like Hrold would have done?" "No," Eirik growled. "We are wolves now, not dogs." Freya stepped forward. "There is another way," she said, "but it will cost more than blood." The room fell silent. Into the dead forest. The next morning, Freya walked into the cursed woods alone. No one dared follow. They said the trees there whispered in old tongues, that children went in and never returned, that a creature with antlers made of bone and a beard of moss stalked the hollows. But Freya had seen worse in her dreams. She walked deep, guided by the tug of the bone needle in her braid. The runes burned on her skin, hot with power. Hours passed, maybe days. At last, she came to the circle of stone, 9 black pillars that rose from the ground like the teeth of giants. There, waiting, was the crone. "Too late to stop the tide, girl," the woman rasped, "but not too late to twist it." "I need power," Freya said, "to protect my people." The crone smiled with no joy. "Then give me what you fear most." The bargain. That night, as the village slept, the wind changed. Crows screeched in the trees. Dogs howled. Mothers clutched their children close. And Freya returned, barefoot, eyes glowing faintly blue, carrying a bag made of stitched skin. "What did you give?" Eirik asked. Freya didn't answer at first. Then she whispered, "My name, my dreams, my peace." Eirik stepped back. "You shouldn't have," I had to. The Black Banner. 10 days later, the sails appeared, jagged, sharp, marked with the black raven. Longships gliding like knives through water. Warriors at the ready, spears shining in the light of the dying sun. And at the prow of the largest ship stood Joran the Cold-Eyed, his face painted like a skull, his cloak stitched with the beards of fallen kings. The villagers lined the cliffs. Freya and Eirik stood at the front, backs straight, unmoving. The king's voice carried like thunder. Skarnhold, you stand defiant. I offer you one chance. Kneel, and I take only 10 of you. Stand, and I take everything. Eirik stepped forward, raising a torch. We kneel to no man. And with that, he flung the torch into the sea. The water hissed, and flames erupted from a hidden line of oil that Freya had ordered poured across the bay days before. The first 3 ships were swallowed in fire. The battle had begun. The children who fought giants. That night, the people of Skarnhold, peasants, mothers, and orphans, fought against one of the greatest warlords of the fjords. Eirik led the charge with a blade in each hand, howling like a beast. Freya stood in the center of the village, casting runes into the fire, summoning visions, confusing enemy scouts, turning animals against their handlers. Children flung stones from rooftops. Women used kitchen knives like daggers. The elderly wielded fire pokers and axes. Blood ran through the snow, but they did not break. The final duel. At dawn, Jorund pushed through the wreckage and found Eirik near the village well, wounded, bloodied, breathing like a dying bear. They circled each other. 2 predators. You could have ruled under me, Jorund sneered. But you followed a witch. Eirik smiled through bloodied teeth. Better a witch than a coward. They clashed, iron on iron. Strength against fury. Experience against desperation. In the end, it was not Eirik's blade that ended the fight. It was Freya's hand, pressed into the ground, whispering a curse. Jorun's heart stopped mid-swing. He fell like stone. The price of victory. The Raven King was dead. His fleet scattered. His banner burned. But the cost was great. Eirik could barely stand. Dozens of villagers had died. And Freya, her hair had turned white at the roots. Her eyes no longer wept, no longer blinked. She barely spoke. She had given herself to something older than the gods. And it had taken hold. Part 8. The Cold Within. Ashes and silence. The war was over. But peace never truly returned. The smoke from Jorun's ships had long faded from the sea. The raven banners were burned and buried. Yet the air in Skarnhold remained heavy, like a breath held too long. Children walked the village barefoot, wrapped in torn cloaks, eyes wide and unblinking. The bodies had been buried, the wounded treated. New fences had been built. But still, there was something wrong. And at the heart of it stood Freya. She no longer ate much, no longer slept. The light in her face had dimmed, and her voice, once calm and clever, had become distant, as if she were speaking from somewhere far beyond this world. The villagers began to murmur. They called her the Witch of Skarnhold, some with reverence, some with fear. Eirik's burden. Eirik ruled now not by crown but by need. People turned to him when food ran short, when disputes flared, when wolves took goats in the night. But his nights were long and sleepless. He watched Freya from a distance, his heart torn. She was the reason they still lived, the reason the Raven King lay cold in a forgotten grave. She had given up her dreams, her joy, herself to save them all. But something unnatural had come back with her. He remembered the old tales of seer that went too deep, of witches who forgot who they were, of voices in the wind that were not gods, but something older, hungrier. He wanted to protect her. But more than once, he wondered if he might have to kill her. The first sign. It began when the birds stopped coming. No gulls, no crows, not even the songbirds in the spring thaw. Their nests were found abandoned, eggs frozen in place. The trees near the old well, where Freya often sat alone, had begun to rot from the inside out. A goat gave birth to a kid with no eyes. A fisherman walked into the ocean and never came back, leaving only a trail of blood across the sand, with no wound to explain it. One night, a girl followed Freya into the woods. She returned mute, her hair turned white. Her mother begged her to speak, but she only rocked back and forth, whispering something about shadows with teeth. Freya's visions. Freya began drawing strange symbols into the snow behind the longhouse, spirals within spirals, runes no one recognized. When asked, she said only, "The door is opening." She woke screaming some nights. Other nights she stood outside, arms raised to the stars, whispering in a language even the elders had never heard. Her fingers bled from clawing at stone. Her eyes glowed faintly blue. She had become a vessel. But for what, no one knew. The gathering storm. Eirik called a council. He stood before the villagers with no crown, no title, only the same blood-soaked tunic he had worn in battle. "We owe her everything," he said. "But something is changing. We cannot ignore it." The old hunter Hegmir, who had lost 2 sons in the war, spoke first. "She is no longer your sister, Eirik. She is something else. And whatever that is, it is not meant to live among us." There was muttering.
Nods.
Then came a voice from the shadows. "Then banish her. Or end her." Eirik's hand fell to his blade, but he did not draw. "I will speak to her," he said. The confrontation. That night, he found Freya at the old standing stones, her hands pressed to the runes. She turned as he approached, and for a moment, her eyes were clear. "I'm still me, Eirik," she said, "but not for long." "What did you give them, Freya?" he asked, his voice tight. She smiled weakly. "My name, my soul, a part of you." "What?" She looked away. "They asked for the one thing I could not bear to lose. So I gave them a piece of you, just enough to bind me to this world." Eirik's face went pale. You shouldn't have." "I know." The door in the ice. The next morning, the snow fell black. Not ash, but black snow. Cold as death, silent as breath in a tomb. The villagers gathered outside in horror. Then came the second sign. A crack opened in the earth behind the village, narrow, deep, breathing steam into the air. Animals refused to go near. The ground hummed with unseen power. And from the depths came a sound like drums, slow, distant, ancient. Freya stood at the edge. "It's waking," she said. "The thing beneath the north. The thing even the gods buried." Eirik drew his sword. "Can it be stopped?" Freya turned to him, tears frozen on her cheeks.
"Yes."
"But not by you."
The choice.
The elders wanted to seal the crack with stones, with iron, with fire. But Freya told them it was useless. "You can't seal what lives," she said. "You can only choose what to feed it." Eirik stood on the cliffs that night, wind tearing at his cloak, watching the horizon. He remembered his childhood, the frostbite, the hunger, the fear. The goat he killed, the raiders, the war, the endless struggle just to survive. And now this. It had never ended, only changed shape. He walked back to the village with a heavy heart. The last quiet night. That night, Freya and Eirik sat by the hearth together, just like when they were children. She looked tired, older. Her hands trembled when she lifted the cup of broth. "Will you stop me?" she asked softly. "I don't know," Eirik said. "I might have to." "I know." She reached into her satchel and handed him something wrapped in wool. It was a small wooden carving, a fox. "The last one I ever made," she said. "In case I forgot." He held it for a long time. Then the wind howled outside, and the drums from the earth grew louder. The thing beneath the north was waking. Part 9. Into the black snow. The cracking world. The snow had turned to ash. Not from fire, but from something deeper. A sickness beneath the soil, a pulse that made the earth shiver. The black flurries fell day and night, soft as whispers, silent as death. No bird sang. No beasts wandered. Even the wolves had vanished from the forest. And still, from the crack behind the village, steam rose, slow and steady, as though the mountain itself were breathing. The children called it the Devil's Mouth. The elders whispered the name Nithvargr, the Devourer, the thing that sleeps beneath. And Freya said nothing. The descent begins. At dawn, Freya stood at the edge of the rift, wrapped in her crow-feather cloak, the bone needle tied into her braid. She had packed nothing. She carried no food, no fire. Only a small pouch of carved runes and a knife of ice glass pulled from the mountain. Eirik met her there, axe in hand, jaw clenched. "You don't have to do this." "I do. You're not alone." "I am." For a long time, they stood in silence, the wind whistling between them. Then Freya stepped forward and vanished into the smoke. The world below. She descended for hours, maybe days. She lost track of time as soon as the sky disappeared. There was no path, only cold rock and dripping walls, wet with something darker than water. And always she heard the heartbeat. Boom, boom, boom. Deep and slow, echoing through the stone. There were bones down here. Not Viking bones, older. Twisted, shattered. Creatures with too many limbs. Jaws where there should have been eyes. Claws like iron. She lit a fire once. It hissed out immediately. The dark swallowed flame here. She spoke her own name aloud, just to hear a voice. But the silence devoured it. Eirik's decision. Back above, Eirik sat by the fire, clutching the fox carving she had given him. Around him, the village waited.
Watched.
They had seen the signs, the black trees, the dead river, the ice that cracked under footsteps even in deepest winter. They feared Freya, but more than that, they feared what came next. Eirik could wait no longer. That night, he kissed the ground where his sister had stood, then took his axe, his torch, and descended into the earth after her. Freya and the dead king. Deep in the dark, Freya came to the chamber of the crowned corpse. A great skeleton sat upon a throne carved into the stone itself. A Viking king, long dead, but not at rest. His eyes were still in his skull, dry and yellow, staring forever. Behind him stretched a door made of bone, ribs of giants, fused together with runes carved in blood. She approached, heart thudding. The dead king spoke without lips. You come to wake what should never stir. I come to bind it. You are too small. I am not alone. She drew the knife of ice glass and cut her palm. Blood dripped onto the ground, hissing, whispering. The bone door began to open. The thing beneath the north. It did not move. It did not breathe. It simply was. An ancient presence, vast and terrible, stretched beneath the mountain like a second world. All bone and black sinew, wrapped in chains of rusted light. A god before gods. A hunger made flesh. It had no face, only a mouth, stretching across the wall of the chamber, full of teeth the size of spears, lips that pulsed like dying suns. And in that mouth something moved. A voice. No language. No words. Just meaning. It spoke inside her blood. We remember you. Freya knelt. I've come to finish the bargain. We hunger. Then take me. The price of power. The god thing moved. Not fast, slow as the turning of seasons, as old as moonlight on broken stone. Its breath shook the cavern. Bones split in the walls. The heat boiled her skin. It touched her with thought alone. Showed her everything. The moment she'd killed her first rabbit. The day her brother gave her a carved doll. Her dreams, her laughter, her memories, burning one by one. Then it stopped. She lay broken, barely breathing, but alive. The god had tasted her, and it had paused, because within her it had found something it feared. Not love, not magic, but choice. And she had made one. She stood, barely, and began to chant. Eirik and the collapse. Far behind, Eirik reached the bone gate just as the ground shook. Rocks split. Steam burst upward. He saw the rib door closing, slowly, painfully. He heard Freya's voice beyond it, chanting, screaming, and then silence. The door slammed shut. A gust of black wind knocked him back. He struck the wall, bleeding, choking. The path behind him cracked, and he ran. The world above. He emerged into the village at dawn, covered in ash, coughing blood, eyes wide. The crack had sealed. The snow had stopped. Birdsong, real, bright, echoed for the first time in months. The villagers gathered, whispering. Is it over? One asked. Eirik said nothing. He simply looked at the sky and wept. Part 10. The Girl Who Never Returned. The new silence. Spring came late that year. The rivers thawed reluctantly, like wounded veins. The snow melted not in joy, but in exhaustion, leaving behind a land scorched by sorrow. In Skarnhold, the birds returned. The fields began to stir with green. Children laughed again. But beneath every breath of new life was the question no one dared to speak aloud. Where is Freya? They had seen Eirik return from the underworld, bloodied, broken, but alone. He did not speak of what he saw. Not in the longhouse. Not to the elders. Not even to the children who had once clung to his stories like prayers. He simply lived. Quiet, watchful. The fox carving she gave him never left his side. the dead still whisper. Though the black snow no longer fell, strange signs lingered. Fish caught in the fjords sometimes bled from the eyes. A baby was born with teeth. A man dreamed of the ocean swallowing the sky and woke with sand in his lungs. And at night, always at night, the sound returned.
Boom, boom, boom. Faint, distant.
Like a heart still beating beneath the earth. Eirik heard it clearest when he stood alone near the sealed crack, now covered in stone, iron, and prayer. But he said nothing, because deep down he knew. The door had closed, yes, but not forever. Only long enough. The hollow throne. The village wanted to name him chieftain. They held a feast, burned a goat, sang songs. But when the time came to place the carved throne crown, once rolled, now reworked from oak and bone, upon his shoulders, Eirik refused. I will lead, he said, but I will not rule. He took the throne and split it with his axe, casting the pieces into the fire. Let no man sit above another while the dead still whisper. And so the villagers did something new. They began to govern together. Every moon, the village gathered in the square. Elders, mothers, warriors, and children. All spoke. All listened. A circle, not a throne. It was strange
and slow,
but it worked.
For a time.
The return of the raven. One night, under a sky cracked with lightning, a raven returned to the village. Not the kind that cawed or picked at bones. This one flew in silence. Its wings dripped shadow. Its eyes glowed like embers. It landed on the roof of the old longhouse, now a place of learning and song, and let out a single, low cry. Eirik rose from his sleep before the sound even came. The raven dropped something at his feet. A single white hair, long, braided with black thread. Freya's. The journey begins again. Eirik knew it instantly. He wrapped the braid in cloth and placed it beside the fox carving. The next morning, he stood before the villagers. I must go. He said nothing else. They didn't stop him. He took his axe, his cloak, a satchel of dried meat and runes, and he left the village in silence, walking into the forest where the crone had once waited, where the ancient trees whispered in forgotten tongues. And there, waiting for him, was a trail of frost. In spring. Freya's path. Far beneath the earth, in a place where no roots grew and no wind howled, a girl stood before a gate made of stars. She no longer remembered her name. She had lost it to the thing beneath the north. Given freely, carved out like a bone from her chest. She had no heart now, only fire, only voice, and the gate before her pulsed with whispers. You have tasted death. Now speak its name. She stepped forward, and the stars began to break. Part 11. The Fire That Walks. Eirik's journey. The forest welcomed no man. It was not cruel, not like the sea or the mountains. It simply watched. Every branch seemed bent toward him. Every path twisted after he passed. The air hung heavy, warm where it should be cold, cold where it should be still. But Eirik did not fear it. He had walked through worse. He carried no banner, no map, only the fox carving in his belt and the lock of Freya's hair tied to his wrist with black thread. He followed signs others could not see. A feather in the moss, a rune carved into a tree's bark, an arrow made of frost embedded in stone. Where Freya had gone, something had been left behind, something that called to him. The land between. On the seventh day, he reached the edge of the world. Or at least it felt like it. The trees ended. The sky faded. Before him stretched a vast plain of silver mist, smooth and still, with no ground, no stars, no time. The realm of Veilguard, the place between life and death, where gods once walked and where broken souls now drift. He stepped forward and fell upward. Freya's becoming. Elsewhere, or perhaps in the same place, for here there was no difference. Freya drifted among constellations that had no names. Her body had vanished. What remained was will. She saw memories like tapestries woven from ash, her father's rough hands, her mother's lullabies, Eirik holding her in the cold, swearing he'd never let go. They spun around her like stars. But she could no longer cry. She had no eyes. She was thought, fire, word, and the gate of the old one was before her still. It whispered, "We remember when the world was bone. We remember the sound of silence screaming. We remember you, and now you will remember us." The trial of the forgotten. Eirik landed in a city made of silence. The buildings were bones. The rivers ran with shadow. The sky turned as he walked, like the inside of a massive eye. He was not alone. Figures began to emerge from the mists, not spirits, not living men, but something in between. The Forsaken, warriors who had died nameless, mothers who had perished in childbirth, forgotten by their clans, children whose graves had never been marked. They stared with hollow eyes, and one by one they spoke. "Who remembers you?" He clenched his fists. "I do." "Who speaks your name?" "I do." "Who will carry her home?" "I will." Then the fog parted, and a gate appeared, made of fire, rimmed with runes that wept blood. Beyond it, the final veil. The reunion of flame. Freya stood in the void. Her essence burned. Her voice rippled across the emptiness like wind across snow. Then a ripple. She turned and saw a shadow, no, not a shadow, a memory, a shape, familiar. Eirik. He was older, scarred, worn down by grief. But it was him. He reached for her. "Freya." Her voice cracked through the void like lightning. "Why did you follow?" "Because I never stopped." And for the first time in what felt like centuries, she remembered what it meant to feel. The stars screamed. The old one stirred. But it was too late, because love had found them. And in the heart of that terrible dark, a light bloomed. The fire wound. The realm shuddered. The veil cracked. A scream, older than creation, echoed through every layer of existence. And then nothing. Skarnhold, years later. The village changed. No one remembered exactly when or how, but the snow melted sooner. Crops grew thicker. Children no longer died in the winter nights. Dreams became clearer. The black crack never reopened. Some said it was Freya. Some said it was Eirik, but others told a different story, of a fire that walks the forest, of a fox that watches from the cliffs, of a girl with white hair who visits the dying and whispers their names before they pass, and a warrior, broad-shouldered, quiet, who sits beside her beneath the moon, saying nothing, just keeping watch. They do not grow old. They are not quite alive. But the land is safe, and peace, for the first time in centuries, lingers. Part 12. Bloodline of Ash and Fire. 100 winters later, Skarnhold no longer resembled the village of old. Gone were the sagging huts of timber and smoke. Now longhouses rose with walls of black stone and roofs thatched with silver pine. The fields reached farther than the eye could see, carved with runes that kept the frost at bay. A new generation ruled here, strong, proud, and strange. They called themselves the Twilight Folk. Their children never fell ill. Their animals never ran lame. Their blades never dulled. But their eyes were not quite right. Too pale, too sharp, as though they saw things beyond this world. And every child was taught the same tale before their third winter. Long ago, the world cracked open, and from it rose two, the flame and the axe, the witch and the wolf. They sealed the darkness. They bound the hunger, and they vanished into mist. But some whispered a deeper truth, that Eirik and Freya had not vanished, that they were still watching. The child who dared to wander. Her name was Erla, born under a blood moon, raised by the sea. Erla was not like the other children. She did not fear the old bones buried in the hills. She spoke to trees. She claimed to see a man made of light and a girl of fire sitting by the cliffs on stormy nights. Her father beat such foolishness from her. Her mother wept and whispered old prayers. But Erla would not stop. At 10 winters, she wandered alone into the forest of Thornfell, where even wolves refused to tread. She found a clearing there, where snow never lay, and fireflies danced in the shape of runes. And sitting there, beneath a tree that glowed with red sap, was a woman, white-haired, barefoot, smiling with eyes that held storms. Freya. The lessons begin. Erla did not speak. She only knelt. Freya placed a hand on her head. You've come early. I don't know why. You never do. That's how fate works. And then Freya began to teach her. Not spells, not charms, but understanding of the sky's moods, of the names of stars that no longer exist, of how shadows remember, of how death is not the end, only the folding of a page. And once, when the wind grew too loud and the forest trembled, Freya took Erla's hand and said, "Now listen. This is what the world screams when no one is watching. Eirik returns. It was nearly a year before Erla saw the other one. He came at dusk, barefoot in the frost, carrying no weapons.
Eirik.
His beard had silvered, though his face was unchanged. His eyes were tired, heavy with memory. He did not speak to her at first, but he watched her train, with blade, with bow, with the rune marks. And when she failed, he helped her up. And when she asked, "Why me?" he only said, "Because she chose. And I trust her." The gathering dark. Back in Skarnhold, things had begun to shift. The rivers grew louder. The stars fell out of rhythm. A trader brought word from the south, of lands swallowed by fog, of graves opening, of things that screamed like children but had no faces. One night, a scout returned from the northern hills, bleeding from every pore, whispering, "The ice is cracking. The old one breathes again." The elders lit the horns, and they sent for Erla. The warning. Freya sat by the sea, the wind tugging at her hair like an old lover. Erla sat beside her. "It's coming back, isn't it?" Erla asked. Freya nodded. "They always do." "Can we stop it?" Freya stared at the horizon.
No.
"But we can shape it." "And if we fail?" Freya smiled faintly. "Then we begin again." The foxes return. Before Erla left for Skarnhold, Eirik gave her a bundle wrapped in fur. Inside was a small, worn carving, a fox, smooth from years of handling. "I carried it through hell," he said. "It reminded me who I was." "Will it protect me?" "No," he said. "But it will anchor you." Erla held it close, and then she walked into the wind. The Twilight War begins. Within a fortnight, the sky split. Storms rolled backward. Wolves howled in foreign tongues. The mountain that had once held the Old One, sealed by Freya's blood and Eirik's blade, cracked anew. But this time, the children of Skarnhold did not tremble. They bore iron. They bore fire. They bore memory. And leading them, her eyes burning with 1,000 suns, her blade etched with runes older than time, was Erla, the child of twilight, the girl who dared to learn from ghosts. Part 13. The Flame That Would Not Die. The first night of screams. The moon had vanished, not hidden by clouds, gone. The sky above Skarnhold was starless, black, as if a great mouth had swallowed the heavens. And from the north came a sound like a war horn made of bone. Long, low, and terrible. That night the ice split open. Villagers awoke to a shaking earth. In the distance, the mountains wept fire. Animals screamed. Babies born that night were all silent. their mouths open, their eyes wide, as though they saw something no one else could. Erla stood at the gates of the village, wrapped in a cloak of wolf fur and shadow. In her hand, the fox carving. In her other, her sword, named Glim, meaning flicker before the flame. Behind her, hundreds gathered. They were not soldiers. They were herders, healers, farmers, and smiths. But every one of them remembered the old stories of a brother and sister who fought the dark alone. And now they would not let it return unchallenged. The frost giants wake. From the broken ice came beasts, not trolls, not wolves, not Draugr, giants, but not like the Jotnar of myth. These were rotted things, stitched together from hunger and memory. Their skin cracked like bark. Their eyes were frozen fire. They marched not with rage, but with purpose. And at their center walked a man in black armor, crowned with horns carved from glacier ivory. He did not speak. He did not raise his weapon. He only carried a mask, a woman's face, carved from bone and shaped like a scream. The villagers didn't know who it was, but Erla did. It was Freyja's. The siege of Skarnhold. The giants struck at dusk. The sky bled red. The very air froze in lungs. But the villagers did not break. They used fire not as a weapon, but as a shield. They lit the trenches with oil and sea fat. They burned old wood, cursed trees, and sacred scrolls. Anything to keep the flame alive. Erla led them like a storm. She moved through the battle with eyes like molten gold, her blade singing with each strike. And then he appeared, the horned one. He did not fight. He only raised the bone mask and held it toward Erla. And suddenly, everything stopped. The mirror of memory. Erla saw it all. Not just Freyja's death, but her becoming. The gods had lied. The old one beneath the north had not been a beast. It had been a godling, cast out by its own kind for what it knew. It had slumbered for millennia, whispering to the blood of seers, waiting for someone with will strong enough to carry its voice. Freyja had not sealed it. She had become its voice. The horned one, once human, had followed her, worshipped her, loved her, and in doing so, twisted his own soul into something else. Erla dropped her sword, because she understood. She was not here to defeat him. She was here to choose. Eirik's return. As the horned one raised his hand to strike her down, roar echoed across the battlefield, not of pain or rage, but of remembrance. And from the fog he came, Eirik, still broad, still quiet, his beard now streaked with snow, his armor glowing faintly with old magic. He moved like a mountain learning to walk. In his hand was a new blade, long, black, carved from the rib of the Old One itself. He did not speak. He simply walked past Erla and struck the Horned One. The shattering, the blow did not kill,
but it broke something.
the sky cracked, time folded. Every soldier, giant, and beast was frozen in a moment of stillness, as though the world itself held its breath. And from the wound in the Horned One's chest, a voice poured out. Freya's voice. Let go, brother. Let her choose. Eirik stepped back. Erla raised her fox carving to the sky and whispered, I choose light. The fox burst into flame, not fire, but truth, a glowing storm of memory, love, sacrifice, and pain. It washed over the battlefield, consuming the giants, the cold, the curse. And when the light faded, only 3 stood, Erla, Eirik, and the Horned One, unmasked, weeping, human once more. Aftermath. Skarnhold did not celebrate. They remembered. They carved new stones. They sang no songs of victory, only of freedom. Erla left the village. Alone, she walked into the forest, her fox carving turned to ash, her sword buried beside the old well. Some say she became the wind. Others say she guards the northern gate still. Eirik stayed until his hair was white, his back bent. He taught, he listened, he waited. And one night, by the cliffs, he looked out over the sea and saw Freya, not dead, not alive, just waiting. Part 14. The Sea That Dreams. A world without time. No sun rose in the eternal realm. No stars guided the dark. It was a place that existed beside reality, like a forgotten dream half remembered in sleep. Here, the winds did not blow, they hummed. Rivers did not flow, they pulsed like veins. Trees did not grow, they remembered themselves into being. And in this realm walked a woman with silver hair and fire beneath her skin. Her name had once been Freya, but now she was something else, something more, and something far, far lonelier. The weaving of echoes. Freya did not age. She moved through this realm of floating mountains and hollow skies, weaving threads of memory from the lives she had touched and lost. Every step left a trail of light behind her. A laugh from a brother long dead, the scent of her mother's bread, the scream of a dying child, the softness of a fox's fur. She had no need for sleep, nor hunger, nor warmth. Only one need remained:
To watch.
Because somewhere beyond the veil, the world still spun, and darkness, like rust, always returned. The Whispering Sea. In the north of the eternal realm lay a sea without color. It did not reflect the sky, for it had no light, but it spoke. And Freya came to it once each turning of the silent star, a constellation only visible to those who remembered what pain tasted like. The sea spoke to her in voices not its own. They fear you even now. The fire you carry will burn them all. Let it die. Let them die. But she did not answer. Instead, she cast her hand into the water and pulled forth lives. She saw Skarnhold. She saw Eirik, now old, now dying, sitting in silence beside the sea cliffs, whispering her name. She saw Erla, wandering the deep wild, her eyes bright, seeking a god who no longer walked in the world. She saw newborns, marked by frost, born with eyes that glowed. And she sought a boy, the child of the burning mark. He was no older than 10, but his eyes were ancient, not tired, not angry, watching. On his chest, just above his heart, burned a mark, a spiral of flame shaped like a fox curling in its sleep. And when he dreamed, he spoke in tongues no one remembered. Freya reached for him through the sea, but something pulled her hand back. Another force. Not the old one. Not death. But fate. It whispered, "This is not your thread. This is his to pull." Freya wept fire, but she let go. The mirror gate. Beneath the sea, deep in its dreaming belly, there lay a gate shaped like herself. A mirror. If she walked through it, she would return. She would bleed again, break again, burn again. She would have to become small,
Human.
and maybe forgotten. But if she stayed, she could remain whole, powerful, untouched, eternal. She stood there for a long time, remembering the cold, the children, the hunger, Eirik's voice in the dark, the day she gave up her name. And then she stepped through. A new dawn in Skarnhold. The sky cracked open at dawn. No one saw it, except for a blind child named Anya, who had never seen the sun. She looked up and said, "She's back." Eirik died that night. He smiled before the end, clutching the fox carving, his fingers shaking. A breeze stirred the longhouse flames, warm and scented with ash and pine. Some say he saw her standing in the doorway, barefoot, watching, eyes full of fire, whispering thanks. And in the forest, wolves began to gather again, not in hunger, but in waiting, because something was coming. Not darkness, not war.
A choice.
Part 15. The Flame-Born Child. The Marked One. His name was Kor. He was born on a frostless winter morning, a rare thing in Skarnhold, under skies painted red and gold. His mother died in labor, and his father disappeared into the forest 3 days after, never to return. The midwife claimed the child never cried. He only stared, and on his chest, above his tiny heart, blazed a mark, a spiral of flame, shaped like a sleeping fox. It shimmered beneath the skin like living light. No blade could cut it. No salve could fade it. The elders knew what it meant. He was chosen, but by what they could not say. The outcast. Kor did not grow like other children. He learned to walk early but spoke late. He could calm dogs with a glance and call birds to his window with whispers. Once, a bear wandered into the village and sat beside him, as if guarding him. Children were told to keep their distance. Some listened. Others threw stones. He never wept. Not once. When he turned 7, he was taken to the seer's hut, deep in the stone woods. The seer, blind and ancient, took his hand and gasped. She whispered only one word, Freya, and died before she could say more. The threads stir. Far away, in the realm between stars and memory, Freya stirred. She felt it. Not a pull, not pain, a presence. Someone walking a thread she had not laid. Someone rewriting the runes she had once carved with blood. She rose from her resting place beneath the tree of dying suns and walked the vale once more, watching, waiting, because the child was not her doing. He was something else, a new spark. The breaking of the hill. When Kor turned 10, he went into the hills alone, where no child dared walk. Old stones dotted the ridgeline, carved in runes no one could read. Snow never fell there. Fires would not burn. It was said the Horned One's mask had been buried beneath the tallest stone, sealed in salt and ash. Kor stood before it.
He did not speak.
He only listened, and the earth answered. It shook.
It cracked.
And from beneath the stone rose a shape of black iron. Not man, not beast, an armored shade without eyes, humming with forgotten hunger. It looked at the boy, and knelt. A sword without a name. That same night, a storm unlike any in living memory swept through Skarnhold. Trees tore from the ground. The river ran backward. Lightning carved runes into the cliffs, the same runes once inked in Freya's blood. When it passed, the villagers found Kor standing in the square, barefoot, soaked, and holding something long and wrapped in leather. Inside was a sword, black as night, smooth as silence. No one had forged it. No one had taught him how to hold it, but he gripped it as if he had always known. And from the blade came whispers, not cruel, not cold, just ancient. Freya watches. From behind the veil, Freya stood among spirits and shadows, her face calm, her hands clenched. "This is not mine," she whispered. But something behind her laughed, an echo of the old one, still lingering in her bones. All things return, even gods, especially gods. Freya turned her back on the voice, because she was no longer a vessel.
She was a witness now.
And the boy was fire, yes. But fire did not always destroy. Sometimes it revealed. The choice to come. Skarnhold waited. The boy walked the streets now like a shadow in daylight. People stepped aside. They whispered of omens, of rebirth, of the age of the flame. Some said he was a curse reborn. Others believed he was the one who would finish what Freya began. But Kor said nothing. He only watched the horizon, where storms were gathering again, darker than before, with wings in the clouds and teeth in the rain. And when no one was watching, he whispered to the sword, "Tell me what I am." And it answered, "You are the question." Part 16. The Dream That Walks. The wind carries names. Winter had returned. Not the soft snows of stories, but the kind that hollowed trees, cracked stone, and buried villages overnight. It howled through the valleys like a voice looking for something it had lost. And in its song, if one listened closely, it whispered names. Freya, Eirik, Erla,
Core.
names of fire, names of blood. And now a new name was being forged, not by the gods nor the stars, but by the cold itself. The North remembered, and it was hungry. The boy becomes Blade. Kor no longer lived in Skarnhold. He had built no home, took no followers, asked for no offerings. Instead, he wandered, forest to fjord, ruin to mountain, guided by dreams not his own and whispers from the sword he still carried, now known only as Hollow Light. It was said he could walk through flame untouched, that wolves bowed their heads when he passed, that when he slept, the air stilled around him, as if even the wind dared not disturb his mind. He was searching, but he didn't know for what. Only that something old was moving again. Something buried in ice deeper than memory. And it was calling to him, the city beneath the glacier. Far in the north, beyond the reach of kings and myths, a place had been forgotten. Jarnjum, the Iron Home. Once a great city carved beneath a living glacier, a place of lore and power, where runes bled and stones spoke. Its people were long gone, swallowed by their own hunger for godhood. But something remained, and when Kor arrived, the gates opened by themselves. No guards, no chains. Only a voice. You bear the fire. Enter. He stepped inside and found a city made of mirrors and ash. The Trial of Mirrors. In the heart of Jarnjum stood a tower, taller than the mountains, but hollow at the center. Its walls shimmered, not with light, but with reflected truths. As Kor climbed, he saw things that had never happened but could have. A version of himself who never bore the mark. A version who burned Skarnhold to the ground. A version who stood beside Freya as her son. Each reflection whispered something different. You are chosen. You are cursed. You are no one. But at the top of the tower stood only one mirror, black, silent, endless. And when he looked into it, he saw her, Freya. She was waiting, but not for him, for what followed him. The followers of the deep flame. Beneath the glacier, deeper even than Jarnjum's lowest crypts, they stirred. Ragged figures dressed in skins stitched from nightmares, their faces hidden behind runes burned into bone, their eyes melted from staring into things not meant to be seen. The deep flame cult, children of the fire before fire, who believed the old one had not been sealed, but reborn, inside a woman who walked between realms. They worshipped Freya not as savior, but as key, and they believed Kor was the one meant to open her fully, not awaken her, unleash her. Freya's choice. From the realm of echoes and rootless stars, Freya saw him, saw Kor staring into her reflection. She knew now, he was not her son, not her vessel, not her heir.
He was her counterbalance.
If she returned, he would fall. If she stayed, he might rise. And somewhere far behind her, The Old One whispered, "You cannot hold two worlds forever. Choose." Freya closed her eyes, and for the first time in what felt like 1,000 years, she stepped back, not through flame,
but through ice.
Kor and the Shard Moon. That night, a new moon rose,
Cracked. Cold.
shimmering not with light, but memory. The world paused. Birds fell silent. Even the sea stilled. And Kor, standing beneath the open sky, raised hollow light to the stars. He did not shout. He did not kneel. He simply whispered, "I will not be your key." And the sword answered, "Then you must become the lock." Part 17. The Woman Who Forgot Her Name. A stranger in the snow. She stumbled from the forest at dawn, barefoot and cloaked in silence. Her silver-white hair was tangled with pine needles. Her breath left no mist. And though she was clad in nothing but torn wool and shadow, she did not shiver. The villagers of Rendhome had not seen a stranger in months, not since the rivers froze mid-flow and the trees began whispering at night. But when she collapsed at their gates, they carried her in. No one asked her name, because deep down they knew she had forgotten it. A world changed. She healed quickly, too quickly. By the 3rd day, she was walking. By the 5th, she was working, chopping wood, mending roofs, tending the old. The villagers whispered of her strength, of how her hands never blistered, of how she sang in her sleep, strange songs that made wolves howl and babies cry. They called her Skarnwife, after the northern mountains, believing she was a ghost of the old gods. But she remembered only flashes. Fire in her blood, a man with a scarred blade, a boy standing alone in the snow, marked with flame, and a name.
Kor.
The man with the hollow voice. One night, a rider came from the north. His horse was blind. His eyes were gone. But he carried no reins, only a bell made of black ice that rang without sound. He entered Rendhome without a word and stood in the square until she approached. "I know you," he said, though he had no sight. "You do not," she replied. "You burned the sky once." "I remember nothing." "You will." And then he crumbled into snow. In his place remained a stone, small, smooth, and warm to the touch, carved with a spiral fox. She clutched it to her chest
And wept.
The road to Skarnhold. She left that night. No farewell, no food, only the fox stone, a staff carved from ironwood, and a dream of cliffs and cold. Her feet bled. The stars twisted. But the road remembered her, even if she did not remember herself. Old oaks bowed their limbs. Rivers split for her passage. The wolves walked behind her, silent and waiting. And far ahead, across the horizon, a single mountain glowed faintly red, like a healed wound pulsing beneath the skin of the world. Skarnhold. Her beginning. Her end. Kor's vigil. In the ruins of Jarnjum, Kor sat in silence. The deep flame cult had scattered. Some fled into the ice caves, others swallowed by the very god they worshipped. He had not pursued. He had seen something in the mirror tower, A vision so sharp it nearly broke him. Freya, alive,
Human.
and walking toward him, not to fight, not to reclaim power, but to ask a question. Do you still believe in choice? Now Kor waited, not with hope, with conviction. He sharpened hollow light every morning, not to prepare for battle, but to remind himself who he was. Because the cold was rising again, and the fire inside him had begun to flicker. The broken circle. When she reached the base of the mountain, the wind spoke in voices. Old ones, familiar, daughter of ash, breaker of hunger, thief of flame. She pressed forward. Each step returned a memory. A fox carved in bone, a brother bleeding in the snow, 1,000 children lost to the cold. She knelt before the threshold of Skarnhold and whispered, I remember. The meeting. He met her at the gate. Neither said a word. She held the fox stone in her hand. He carried hollow light at his back. Snow fell. Slowly, she approached and placed the stone into his palm. He looked at her, really looked. The same eyes, the same fire, but older, wiser,
Sadder.
Do you know who I am? She asked.
Kor shook his head. No.
But I know what you are. She nodded. I am the storm before the end. Part 20. The threads begin to tangle. The awakening. The glade was silent. Where once the moss-covered fox statue had rested, now there was only Lova, standing in the soft mud, her fingers glowing faintly from the thread of light she had touched. The birds had fled. The air buzzed, not with sound, but with intention. And behind her, the trees began to bend ever so slightly, not in the direction of the wind, but toward her. She did not cry. She did not run. She simply whispered, I remember, though she didn't know what or who. Whispers in the wind. That night, back in the widow's cottage, Lova didn't sleep. She sat on the roof, staring at the stars, listening to the wind as if it were telling her secrets. And perhaps it was, because when the sun rose, she had drawn something into the ash on the hearthstone, a spiral of flame, and inside it, a fox with eyes like stars. Kor's long walk. 3 days north, Kor walked the trail he once swore never to take again. Hollow light was slung across his back, still wrapped in the cloth he'd buried it in. But the sword hummed now, softly, like an old dog rousing from sleep, sensing something stirring in its master's blood. He walked through woods where the trees still bore scars from the last war, where shadows moved even at noon. He passed old runes carved by his own hand. He passed the graves of people whose names he could no longer remember or bear to speak. But he walked on, because the fire had called, and he knew what it meant. The child and the flame. Lova changed after the shrine. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her words had a strange weight, as though they were remembered, not invented. She touched broken things, and they mended. She walked into the river, and the water stilled. She stared into fire, and it flickered toward her. The villagers, once kindly curious, now watched with uneasy silence. Old women made charms. Mothers pulled their children away when Lova passed. A few whispered old names. A flame child. A mark of the past. Freya's return. But none of them understood. Not yet. The dream of the drowned world. That night, Lova dreamt of a world underwater. Ruins drifted in a great black sea. Bones swayed like seaweed. And in the deepest trench lay something vast and coiled, a shape without a name, its eye the size of a mountain. It opened. And she saw herself, not as a girl, but as a woman made of embers and sorrow, standing upon a frozen sea, burning without burning. When she woke, she was crying, but the tears hissed as they hit the ground, because they were hot. The cult returns. Far to the east, beyond the fjords and frozen rivers, something ancient crawled out of the dark. They were not many, only 7, wrapped in bone dust and oilskin, faces hidden behind iron masks. They had once followed the old one. Now they followed her. Not Freya, not yet Lova, but the fire that waits. They walked the coasts in silence, carving spiral runes into stones, bleeding into the snow, chanting. She returns not as God, but as choice. Not as vengeance, but as end. Where they walked, storms followed. Kor and the ash grove. Kor reached the ash grove by dusk, a place where old trees, once green, now stood gray and cracked from lightning. This was where Freya had last been seen. He knelt in the circle where she had vanished, buried his hand in the cold soil, and for the first time in decades he prayed. Not to gods, not to fate, to her. Freya, he whispered, if you are in her, let her choose different. Let her choose peace. And the wind stirred. Not harsh, not cold, just watching. Part 19. Embers in the Ashes. Years later, the world had grown quiet. The great wars of gods and ghosts had ended. The Hollowborn had vanished. The Raven Prince was now a whisper in old songs no one sang anymore. Skarnhold rebuilt slowly, stone by stone, memory by memory. Children laughed again. Fires crackled for warmth, not warning. But in the woods beyond the village, where frost still clung to the roots even in spring, something ancient stirred. The girl without a name. She had no mother, no father. Found as an infant near the roots of the old pine, wrapped in fox fur, her skin warm even in the snow, she was raised by an old widow who called her Lova, though the name had never been spoken aloud by the girl herself. Lova didn't speak at all. Not until her 9th winter. That was the day she followed the raven. The Fox Shrine. Deep in the forgotten glade beyond Skarnhold stood a moss-covered stone, carved in the shape of a sleeping fox. It was cracked, worn down by rain and years, but still watched the forest with eyes closed. Children called it cursed. Elders called it sacred. No one dared go near it, except for Lova. The raven led her there, a one-eyed black bird with feathers that shimmered with strange light. When she reached the shrine, the air changed. She felt seen, not watched.
Seen.
The voice in the stone. She placed her hand on the fox's head. It was warm, and then a whisper. Gentle, wiser than time. You've come early. She tried to speak, and for the first time in her life, her voice did not tremble. Who are you? Not who. What? I am the flame that hides beneath silence. I am memory, and you are awakening. Suddenly, visions poured through her. A boy with burning eyes. A woman with white hair walking through storm. A sword buried in snow, humming with sleep. A village on fire. A god screaming without a name. And at the center of it all, the fox. Not an animal, but a keeper. Kor returns. Far away, in a hut on the edge of the world, Kor awoke with a jolt.
He was old now.
Weathered. His fire dimmed, but not dead. He had walked away from Skarnhold after Freya disappeared into the hills, swearing never to raise his sword again. But that morning, the sword, Hololight, pulsed beneath the earth where he'd buried it. And the fire whispered, "She is found." The flame reignites. Back at the shrine, Lova stood motionless. The fox statue crumbled, gently, not broken but released. Inside the hollow space where its heart would have been, something glowed. Not gold, not fire, but a thread of woven light, thin as hair, strong as blood. She touched it, and everything changed. The trees bowed, the raven screamed, and the wind whispered one word: Freya. Freya's legacy. In the beyond realms, where spirits drift like dust and time is a wheel with no spokes, Freya stirred. She had gone deep, beyond even the veil, to rest, to forget, to unmake herself. But now, a piece of her had returned, not as fire, not as fury, but as a girl, a child who had never spoken, a child with a future older than the world itself. And Freya, wherever she now wandered, smiled, not with sadness, but with hope.